And wherever you want to, don't worry about that, whatever you want.
Yeah, all right. So Rashmi, you want to do the intro? You can go whenever.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to welcome Corina Bellizzi to present to us today about a wonderful podcast about social impact that she started when she was actually studying here at SCU. Corina is an SCU alumni. She graduated last year in summer. And since then, she has multiple podcasts that she has introduced and been running.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us and for being able to meet us here.
Well,
We're very
honestly-
excited to hear what you have to say.
My pleasure to actually have the opportunity to get in person for the first time in a very long time at Santa Clara University. So I'm just going to go ahead right now and look at the controls here just so that we can make sure people are muted. And then we can get started. See. So I'm muting all participants and then putting mine forward. Can you guys hear me? Let me check if we can hear. Let's see. Just making sure that people can hear me. They can hear me. Great, perfect. All right, let's go. Okay. So my journey in podcasting is perhaps a little different than many. I decided when I was in my studies here and probably spending far too many hours in the books while feeling disconnected from other people that I would love to see more because of COVID and everything else, that I could utilize all of the skills I'd already gained, media training, whatnot, and just start my own show to put a little bit more good into the world. So that is my purpose with Care More, Be Better. It is to invite people to care a little bit more so that together we can all create a better world. So as we journey through this, I'm going to do live transcription, but it doesn't seem to be a problem with that. I started Care More, Be Better in January of 2021. And I say started at that point because I put my trailer out into the world, not realizing, oh my gosh, I should have all my episodes at the same time. I made a few fumbles. Everybody does when they first start podcasting, unless they're in some giant production company. But I saw the reception really was warm, open. People wanted to hear the things I was talking about. And I had the opportunity for the first time in a long time to reach out to some real thought leaders that I wanted to have deep conversations with about the challenges that we face from a social impact perspective, or from a sustainability perspective, or from just a moral issues perspective. So it opened these doors for me in a whole new way. The proof is in the pudding. You know, I started it in January 2021. By the time that I got about halfway through the year, it had already risen to about the top 3% of all podcasts globally. So it demonstrates for you that you can have an impact by using your voice in this way. It's a really novel method to reach the masses. I started another podcast, The Media Casters, in November of 2021 with my business bestie, Julie Logan. We're actually building a sort of pseudo production company to help people launch their voices into the world. And so it's one part podcast, one part community, and one part publication and production company. And you guys will hear a little bit more about that. And so we saw the need as we were getting this podcast off the ground, the Media Casters, to help elevate the voices of other podcasters. Independent voices, voices that don't get all the funding behind iHeartMedia or Wondery or Spotify, the millions of dollars that they might throw at some of these bigger projects. And so we started a third podcast, Podtease, which essentially it provides the best of the best independent podcasts. We play an episode end to end. We ask the podcasts that are submitting their episodes to us for consideration to give us their favorite episode or their best performing episode. We listen to the show start to finish, record a 2 to 3 minute intro, and put it out into the world. That launched on Earth Day. It was already in the top 200 podcasts on Apple Podcasts last week for arts and entertainment. And so this goes to show people want to hear independent voices. They just don't necessarily know how to find them. So building a platform that enables us to do that is something that I'm really passionate about because they could be in the social impact space, they could be in the sustainability space, the leadership space. Providing people with an opportunity to get their voices out into the world, to refine their talent in speaking is quite incredible. And you don't just have to do it as a podcaster. It's something you could do as a guest. Let's say you decide to write the next big book to change the world, like Paul Hawken's Regeneration, ending the climate crisis in one generation. Audacious title. He went on a podcasting tour, the likes of which you rarely see. And 2 weeks after his book launched, it was already a New York Times bestseller. Granted, he has a lifetime of writing books. He's a big name in the industry. He was probably going to get there no matter what. But I had the opportunity to interview him on my show. And so we'll talk about that a little bit too. Now, first, we're going to talk about why I podcast, like what I decided to do, what it does to establish your credibility. Guesting on podcasts, like the Paul Hawkins of the world, and like myself, and then creating your own, like what does it actually take? Because a lot of the information that you hear out there, it can sound like, oh, you can just pick up a phone and start recording on it and launch your podcast on Anchor. That's true. It is true. You can do that. But with a little planning and with using a lot of what you're learning here at Santa Clara University, you can create a much better chance at success. And so refining your message and getting there overall. So my why, and this is work I did here also while getting my MBA at Santa Clara. You ask yourself a lot of questions about your values. Why are you here? What is it you hope to achieve? What is the difference that you personally want to make in the world? And for me, through doing all of these deep dives, I kept coming back to one thought. I very much value connection. It's connection between people. It's connections that you establish while you're at school, through your work, your personal life. It's even the connections that you have built with your entertainment, like who you go to for information. Even though that connection might be one way, it changes your perception. It's the information that you're bringing into your mind, your soul, your ethos, your everything. It affects you. And that connection is something that you'll never, ever need to separate yourself from. One of the things that you'll learn in closing remarks from Nydia, as you get your MBA from this university, is that if she would have you leave this educational journey with one thing, it is that your connections are powerful. And that through the power of leveraging those connections, of developing deep relationships with people, of connecting with inspiring thought leaders that you value, that you can change your trajectory and you can even alter your own mindset and develop into something that's greater than you might have thought you were capable of. And so I come back to this over and over throughout my own life, and it wasn't just through this education journey. Curiosity. Curiosity, because even in your journey through life, if you don't remain curious, what happens? You're stifled. You don't learn as much. You stop learning. When you don't remain curious, when you don't embrace curiosity, it's as if you've just stopped short of the end of reaching your ultimate. And I believe that by remaining curious about the topics that I'm going into on my podcast, or remaining curious about the kind of separation or difference I might have from another person, like, wow, that's really interesting. Why do they have such a different viewpoint from my own? Where might that be coming from? What else might we have that's different? What do we have that's similar? And finding common ground. Because if we aren't able to find common ground together, then we don't grow. And so that's something that I've always really cared about and which I continue to kind of put in some central frame. And the last is impact. And that is really, how am I leveraging my experience and my skills and everything I put into my life to make an impact? And so I look at my first podcast I started in January of last year, Care More Be Better, as that effort. It's an invitation to get people to care a little bit more about the issues that we talk about on the show, so we can create a better world, so that we can be better, so that I can be better. because I'm not perfect today. Certainly wasn't perfect yesterday, and I'm not going to be perfect tomorrow. But if I'm on this quest my entire life to care a little bit more, so that we can be better, so that I can be better, then the world that we can imagine can be different than it has been. It can be better, can be more connected, can be more curious even, and curious in a really good way. So through the power of podcasting, and I'm calling this the power of podcasting because I had an issue with networking. I didn't like doing it. I didn't particularly like reaching out to someone and say, oh, well, I'd really like to talk to you about X, Y, or Z, or it would be really nice to learn from your perspective about how I might step into a role like yours at one point in the future. It felt really uncomfortable. It felt uncomfortable, especially as I considered whether I wanted to keep working at the top of my industry in the natural products industry, or if I wanted to pivot to something else. I've worked in the world of supplements now for 20 some odd years. I've been paid at the top of my industry. I've built multinational, very successful brands, the number one of which is Nordic Naturals. Like when I joined them, they were selling less than $1 million a year in annual revenues. And by the time I left as the second in command and head of sales, marketing, and education, we were in 34 countries around the globe. We had the number one selling fish oil, number one selling Ultimate Omega, number one selling prenatal product, number one selling children's nutrition product. I mean, just on down the line, we were top, and annual revenues were over 100 million a year. And I was bored stiff. The job was the same every day. I no longer embraced the challenges. It wasn't fun anymore. And the reasons for that really connect to the fact that I didn't feel like I was making an impact that was any different than the day before anymore. And so I looked at my career and I said, I want something more. I don't know if I just want to stay in the world of supplements for my whole life. I want to embrace something that's more connected to impact, and social impact, sustainability, they matter to me. So how can I pivot? I got this education, I have my MBA now, I've got the street cred, I have the experience, but yet I'm intimidated about this next phase and how I might get there. So the podcast, I didn't know when I started that it would become what it has become. It was one step in a direction to open a door to me talking to some of the most, I mean, honestly, I look at these people as mentors, friends, and I aspire to be like them. I have a goal. I want to be able to interview Jane Goodall before she dies. I want to talk about animal rights and climate activism. I want to be able to connect with Greta Thunberg at some point in the near future. And I'm getting closer. I mean, at this point, I have had the pleasure of interviewing Paul Hawken. And I did bring this book, it's well worn. I did an 11 podcast series on the content of this book, where each Friday I'd go through a chapter and I'd tell people what I learned from that chapter. I'd talk about the things that it helped me learn, the beliefs that I had that shifted. Sometimes we laughed a little. And something amazing happened about halfway through this. I learned that a high school in Ohio chose my podcast as curriculum to learn about climate change. So all I knew is I was trending in Ohio. I didn't know why. Suddenly I'm getting all these downloads. And so this entire series gets binge listened by some 17-year-olds. And they start sending me email messages with suggestions for other people that I should connect with, including someone that Paul Hawken introduced me to and who I featured in a recent episode. And that is Clover Hogan, right? Now she is leading a company called forceofnature.xyz. And what's really cool about them is that they're working to sit at this intersection of inspiring young people to become active, of giving them the skills that they need to sit on boards, to be a part of the conversation that is happening at companies from coast to coast, from country to country, and to help affect change for our climate, for our global systems. So what's the point? I'm changing. The podcast is changing. I am ultimately now cued into some of these thought leaders that I never thought I would have had a chance to have a conversation with, or be a confidant of, or have the type of relationship where they say, oh yeah, just, let's think about what we can do together next. So this could go any number of places. I featured Tom Newmark, who's a co-founder of the Carbon Underground. Now, I knew him from the natural products industry. And he joked when I interviewed him, it's like, well, it's a good thing we can still be friends. And the reason is that we were on opposite sides of a pretty fierce competitive battle for a while. So what I will say is that this podcast helped me mend a bridge. And that should not be something that you should discount either. I mean, there's potential there, but the curiosity, the remaining open, and the bravery it takes to sometimes reach out to someone who you might have had animosity with in the past. At any rate, I've featured Howard Schiffer. He's the founder of Vitamin Angels. And if you're not familiar with his work, I encourage you to just look it up because incredible human. He has sought for the last 30 plus years to end nutrition-related infant blindness. Sounds like a big goal, sounds like an audacious goal, especially when we know that people all over Peru and in other countries around the globe where they didn't have access to the same type of nutrition, that they would literally succumb to illness because they didn't have immune systems that were built up. They would succumb to blindness because they didn't have enough of this key nutrient to actually develop all the connections in their brain so it could work properly and in the eye. So now his new goal is to end nutrition-related mortality on a global scale. And sadly, the challenge is bigger here now in the United States than it used to be. Infant mortality is on the rise. So the charge is big. People are working hard. So staying curious. When we keep curiosity in central frame, we will learn more. We will create compelling interviews if we have an interview format for a podcast. And we will host powerful, powerful conversations. And so that's what I work to do through this show. I try to dispel my disbeliefs for an hour, remain as open as possible, listen as actively as possible, and have my notes, but ultimately just be open to letting the conversation flow, to letting it happen, and to being really open while it does. And these things help to inspire its growth. The impact I'm working to create is global. That's why I feature people from all over the globe. That's why I talked to Clover Hawken from the UK and Lydia Kamunto Bosire as she's working to bring more education resources to people of Africa. I'm committed to something bigger than myself because it's my belief that together we can create caring communities and we can even regenerate Earth. So big asks, big dreams, but what's not to want? So through my podcast, largely, I worked to establish my personal credibility in a space that was different than just supplements, right? Just nutrition. And the proof is here. I launched it in January 2021. In June of 2021, it had already reached the top 3% of all podcasts globally. By September, I had some star guests, including Paul Hawken and Mo Gaudat, who was the Chief Business Officer of Google X. And he is now a best-selling author. He has a not-for-profit called 1 Billion Happy. His goal in life is to make 1 billion people happy. And he wrote a book that's best-selling called Solve for Happy, and the more recent one called Scary Smart about artificial intelligence and how we need to focus on teaching it so that it doesn't try to destroy us. I mean, that's the basics. Like I summed it up in the shortest way possible.
For a quick question. So,
Yes.
1 billion happy you mentioned, right? So how is that project going on?
So yeah, so the thing so what I know about what Mo Gaudat's current landing is with that, he does have a podcast called Slow Mo. He's reaching people through that every day. He interviews some incredible people and just has deep discussions with them, ultimately about happiness, about living a little slower. But Solve for Happy, he's basically made all the money that he needs to make in his life. He now wears, he boasts about this a little bit. I wear a $4 t-shirt and tennis shoes. Like I'm unassuming, he just is really focused with his work and writing. All of the money goes back into the 1 Billion Happy project. And he's working to teach people the simple things that they can do in their lives to be happier. because all the money in the world and all the success in the world and the beautiful wife and the fast car never made him happy. And so he went on a deep dive and has like literally written the equations, the algorithms to solve for happy. And that's why the book is titled that. It's a great read. I think it's got some really sound advice in it that you may have heard in different ways over the years from different thought leaders and different speakers, but I really like his style and I encourage you guys to check him out. And then in October, now the wins are smaller, right? Like it's harder to get to the top 0.05%. I'll get there one day, but I'm now on the top 2.5% of podcasts globally. To give you an idea, I think Joe Rogan is the 0.01. Maybe he's 0.001 at this point, but we'll see. And then my show topped 5,000 downloads in a single month in December, so it's continuing to grow, and it feels good. Gratification that people want to hear. Now, one of the biggest ways that you can actually get your message out into the world, whether you be podcasting or on a book tour or anything like that, is actually through guesting on other shows. And so I show you here a smattering of the shows that I've guested on. And I did put Pod Tease there, just as a little teaser, so to speak, because I put my show with Paul Hawken up as one of the example early episodes. We look at the early episodes as a bit of a sacrificial lamb because most people don't necessarily go back to episode 1 to listen to your arsenal, and it takes some time to build. But by putting some big names early on in there, then it got some attention, and that's also part of how it got to the top 200 on Apple Podcasts for arts and entertainment with $0 advertising dollars, right? So obsessed with humans on the verge of change. Julie Logan's pictured there, Tia Weldon, Mika Altador. I met Julie on Clubhouse. I went on Clubhouse because other students in my MBA class said, "You're podcasting, you really need to be on Clubhouse." So ultimately, I have forged some relationships through social audio, which I've also found to be a really interesting place to drive for change, because people are having open conversations on a continual basis on Clubhouse and on the Wisdom app about the things that matter to them. They're finding opportunities to collaborate, to do things like bring water to communities that don't have clean drinking water, or to create funding campaigns for children's schools like Mumsy does on Clubhouse almost every day. She's got some projects in Western Africa where she's getting supplies together and then goes to Africa and brings them to communities there. And all of that is happening on Clubhouse. So if you guys aren't on social audio and you have a hankering, it is a good place to connect with other people around the globe where you can further these conversations. I've guested on Armchair Historians and talked about my undergraduate work, my favorite history of Neanderthals. So it's, not necessarily in my pocket or in my lane, so to speak, but I can always find a way to connect back to the things that really matter. And I trust that when people hear a message like, look, we need to work together, we need to create better systems. And my podcast is about unveiling some of the problems in our society and working towards solutions. So they listen, they come over from these shows. Girish Bali's Back to Basics. He was in here a little bit earlier. Cause Pods, podcasts with a cause. All he does is feature podcasts that have a cause behind them. So it's a place that I've gone to discover other podcasts that I want to guest on. Sales and Cigars. I connected with him after seeing a resource on Podmatch. So there's all these different places you can go online, even if you don't have a show, if you're interested in creating a show of your own, or if you just have a message you want to get out there, you can create a profile on Podmatch or on Audrey.io or on any of these other spaces that are now available to kind of pitch yourself, so to speak, and find a match and practice your craft, refine what it is that you're working to say, and get your message out there. I think this is an incredible asset for people who are thinking about what they might want to do in public speaking. If you have a particular initiative that you want to get behind, even on a regional basis, because there are regional shows of all sorts too. And all of the radio shows that you know and love are now coming into the podcast world. So establishing your voice in this way can be very, very helpful. What I'll now say is that you can go and Google Corinna Bellizzi. And instead of getting 20 years of history of me working in omega-3s, you get my work at podcasting now. So it's essentially shifted the view of me from the outside. Now, part of the reason that this is true is that for the last year and a half, I've been working on a confidential project. I've not been able to talk about it publicly. So everyone in my community believes that I am just in media and podcasting now. I'm not doing anything in the nutrition field. But as of next week, I'm launching a carbon negative omega-3 product that's been in architecture for the last year and a half. So it's pretty exciting. That I'm also launching a podcast to support its growth. So if you're interested in getting started podcasting, this is something that you decide that you want to do. There's 3 basic things that you need to really focus your time, energy, and effort on. And that is constructing your story, getting your studio ready, and then starting to record. And there are so many tutorials online for how you edit your own show that this is not something that you necessarily need to spend a lot of money doing. Now, granted, when I launched Care More Be Better, I made the choice to have my first 6 months of podcasts roughly produced by an external company. I found one that was quite affordable and I worked with them closely. And then I figured as soon as I graduated from college, well, from my MBA program, that I would start doing my own episodes. I'd do my own editing. And that's the path I did pursue. What I will say is I wish in a way that I'd done it in reverse. I wish that I'd started by editing my own shows. And the reason I say that in hindsight is because when you listen to your shows and you have the different audio tracks and you're editing it and splicing it together, you learn things about what you prefer. You learn things about how you speak, the verbal crutches you might have, your microphone performance, how close you really need to get to the microphone, all of these things. You learn about the craft of it. And you become a better communicator and a better podcaster, even in just a few episodes of editing. And so if this is something that you want to pursue, I would say get your studio ready and then do a little bit of training for yourself to learn how to do some simple editing using tools like Descript, which is inexpensive and easy to use. You can edit audio just like you would a Word doc. It's just really incredible. You can even insert a different word if you said a word that you didn't mean to, because you can train its AI on, oh, I said 6 instead of 7, shoot, you know? Well, the whole thing's blown now. You have to go re-record that part. Well, you train the AI on your voice and you can literally go in and change the word and the voice changes. Pretty incredible. So that tool is called Descript. And then you can also use a simple audio editing tool like Audacity, which is a free open source software that you can get for anything from your PC to your iOS device to even something, a Linux machine. They have it for everything. And I've left this here, but really like the 1-2 punch is construct your story, get your studio ready, and record, edit, and launch your podcast. There's more to this, of course, right? But that's also something that I can help you with. We have a community that we've developed. It's completely free. It's called the Media Casters. Julie and I worked to bring it together, ultimately connecting with people that are in podcasting, broadcasting. So some of them are radio shows that are terrestrial based, right? Also publishing and presenting. So giving people the resources they need to put together their story, to get it out into the world. And there's roughly 300 people in there. We started this back on November 2nd. So you'll see that we're the oldest members in there, November 2nd, 2021. By December 1st, we had over 100 members and it's continuing to grow. Now it's growing very organically and people are inviting others in. Many podcasters, some people in media, like from the media tour perspective, like Dr. Deborah Gilboa, Dr. G, Ask Dr. G, she's in here. Dr. Sherry Campbell, who, because of Julie's work, really actually has her own podcast now. She's somebody who helps people sever family ties that are toxic, cutting toxic family ties. Unfortunately, that's a reality for some people, but it's really a vibrant community. We host office hours every Thursday. And during our office hours, we're often giving people the tools they need to do simple things like I can't get my Apple Podcast feed to work. What's going on? Oh, share your screen with us. We'll figure it out together. So we go through those nuts and bolts things too. We also support one another's podcasts. So we'll write each other reviews or go listen to a show, share it a little bit, and give that kind of back scratching community that helps all of us grow together. And it's been really, really a pleasure. And I mean, I'm just honored to have the group. It's really incredible. So this is run on a platform called Mighty Networks, which is a female-led company out of Silicon Valley. You can create your own network. It's kind of like, let's call it a safer Facebook, right? Because one of the things I saw on Facebook groups specifically is that there were some nefarious practices happening in some of them, people trying to sell scam services. I can help you market your podcast. Let me get you more downloads. And really all it is they employ bots to try and download your episodes from a bunch of places. Apple Podcast flags that. The other podcast companies know what that is. And so it doesn't actually improve your ranking on any of the podcasts. It just makes your download numbers look good. And, you know, so you don't want to pay for stuff like that. It's not going to get you anything. It's just fuzzy, fake stuff, right? And so we keep the media casters clean and there's none of that. And we just completed this book. So Audiocasters is a book about using your voice to bring it into the world through podcasting, guesting, whatever you might choose to do. And so as a gift for everybody here, if you're interested, all you have to do is send me an email and we will get you the pre-pressed copy. It is in formatting now and is meant to be ready by the time we speak at PodFest at the end of the month. We're going to be in Florida speaking on using community to build your podcast because it's something that we're doing. So it's 170 pages, I think, unformatted, roughly 150. I don't know what it'll end up being exactly once it's formatted. But it does include too a 12-week launch plan to help you actually build everything you need to in order to successfully launch. And you'll also notice what is probably a summary of some of the work that you guys did in Marketing 3000. Because talking about your value proposition, your values, your mission, your vision, getting all of that together is incredibly helpful when you're building your messaging strategy, when you're thinking about what social platforms you might want to work on and own, how you're going to get the word out, whether or not you're going to invest in it, what you might do to monetize the podcast, which seems to be the #1 question we always get. How do I make money doing this? Becoming the next Joe Rogan, that's a hard path. It's not going to happen overnight. But you can do things to cover your costs and grow and even get sponsorships along the way. And there's some pretty neat alternative ways to monetize your podcast too. So I think that's about the close of what I had to share from a presentation perspective. The 3 things that I would have you take away from today are that you can use your voice for good. Podcasting is really an incredible tool. And you don't have to go it alone. You can build a community of your own. You can join ours. I want to be a resource for people that are interested in the world of podcasting because I'm obviously addicted to it and I love it. So that's the meat of it. I love it. Some basic tools for you to consider building, even if you never decide to have your own podcast. Building a simple press sheet for yourself. I put this together to get out into the world and talk about my podcast just before I went to She Podcast Live in October. And I found that it was just really nice to get on one sheet, the types of things that I wanted to talk about if I got on a podcast, and a couple unordinary questions, like, yes, I can talk about evolutionary theory, something I know quite a bit about. I can talk about Neanderthals and probably geek out on you a little bit. And I can definitely talk about omega-3s. I'm tired just about everybody in this room. And the things that I want to speak about are related to impact and building a more sustainable future. Walking away from the idea of sustainability into something that is more of a circular economy so everybody can succeed. So it's not just a few. That's the pulpit I stand on the daily. Love to have questions. Love your thoughts. Thank you guys. I'm going to see if there's questions up here too.
There is a question about Dina has asked, what were the websites the speaker mentioned?
The websites for what?
We should get them off mute and just see.
Yeah, I think we can unmute. So let me see. 9 participants. Think anybody can unmute at this time? I see Kevin Henry. Yeah, there you go. So do we have any questions from the online room? Okay,
Karina, I have a question.
yes, please.
In the social impact world, how do you connect with people you don't know? You know, like there's some people you know from your background, but how about the people you don't know, like Paul Hawken, for instance? You know, how do you connect with them to establish your credibility and have him be open to come and talk to you?
Well, I mean, the story of how I got connected to Paul Hawken is actually kind of odd. By that point, this is midsummer of the first year. So like, you know, I've been podcasting for probably 35, 40 episodes at the time. And it was a Stanford researcher who was reaching out to me through their pitching company, which is, I think, Kitcaster. So these individuals, when they're doing book tours or media tours, will often employ a company that helps them pitch out to places. So they found my podcast, wanted him to come on and talk about his ideas around design thinking as it relates to climate activism. So he came on my show, and at the tail end of that interview mentioned that Paul Hawken was coming out with this book, Regeneration. I should really talk to him. He didn't offer to introduce me. I didn't know they knew each other. I also didn't know that he was Paul Hawken's neighbor. So I just went to regeneration.org, the website, and pitched them through there. His son responded. I'm assuming it was his son because it's the same last name, and asked me about 30 different questions. So then I had to work to establish my credibility by leveraging my knowledge already in the space, talking about the fact that David Johnson had mentioned this. Like, I didn't know that that was a name drop, but it was, you know. And that also I had already reached the top 3% of podcasts. I had this many downloads a month, and I would be committed to supporting this effort, even through perhaps a little bit of an advertising spend. Like, it would have been meager, right? And so they finally said yes. And then Paul and I talked for way longer than I anticipated. The interview was almost 2 hours. I edited it down to 1 hour and 35 minutes. So, you know, it took out any of the stuff that just felt like chaff. The biggest way that I have connected with people that I wanted to meet was through Instagram and LinkedIn so far, and also Clubhouse. On the image here, I'll go back a few screens. Sorry, get to the right screen. And I go back, here we go. So if I go back to my pitch screen here, you see Nana Abba Anamoa. She is the general manager for GH1 TV. She's got over 3 million followers on Instagram. I wasn't going to make a splash connection with her there, but I ran into her on Clubhouse, and I knew who she was and asked if we could connect. I interviewed her on Clubhouse in a club there, and then invited her on my podcast. And so what that did for me almost immediately, as soon as I interviewed her, I was like trending in Ghana, like in the top 100 charts of all podcasts, because she's doing so much there. And the reason I wanted to talk to her over just about anybody at that point was because she's doing a lot for the LGBTQ community in Ghana. It's literally illegal to be gay in Ghana. You get denied healthcare because somebody decides, oh, well, he's, you know, he's a homosexual, you can't treat him at the hospital, and they get turned away. And these are big, big issues, big systemic issues. And so I reached out through Clubhouse, and then through Instagram, and then through Clubhouse again, and then through Instagram again, just as I came across her. I don't think there's any one way, but what I will say is LinkedIn has proved to be a very valuable tool. In some cases, I've just started kind of cyber stalking their social profiles on Twitter or Instagram, making comments, waiting till I get kind of noticed, and then send them a message after that. Sometimes that takes voracious follow through, but the reality is at this point, most of these people are coming to me to come on the podcast at this point. They either Kitcaster or Oscar Hamilton or one of these other PR agencies is reaching out and saying, I have somebody who I think you might be interested in talking to and telling this specific story. because of the content that you put out to the world. So I think that can't be discounted, but the reach out, the earlier days, I was reaching out a lot more. I was using LinkedIn Podmatch, which also matches guests to potential podcasts or podcasters to other podcasters. That's an incredible tool. Audry.io, and that's AUDRY.io is another platform like that. And Guest.io is, I think, a third one where you can actually go and look for people that might be on speaking tours and podcasting tours. Another thing is anytime somebody writes a book, they tend to want to go on podcasts. They want to do a media tour. And so if somebody you admire writes a book, that's a great time to reach out to them. I'm going to see if there's some other chats in here. A website where you meet other podcasters. This is from B. McKay. I think it was a website where you meet other podcasters. So Podmatch is one. The MediaCasters, you can come meet other podcasters in our group. And that is just themediacasters.mn.co. It's a mighty network, so that's what the .mn.co is for. You can go to the mediacasters.com as well, and it connects those spaces. So if you want to come meet podcasters in the MediaCasters community, that's a great place to come. Podmatch, if you want to build a profile, search other profiles, search for podcasts. That's an incredible tool because you can actually listen to the show there too and see a profile on the guests or the speaker or the host of that show and decide if that's going to be a good match for you or where you want to tell your story. Okay. Let's see. And I got another note from Bima. Thank you. Thank you, Bima. Let me scroll up.
Those were taken care of.
Yeah, okay. All right, very good. Well, I think that's
One reply.
All right, so I have a question. When you're starting off a podcast, how do you know what platform is right? And then two, because this is what I've heard before, where you need to put it on all platforms and do it, everywhere. And I'm not sure if that's the right answer or not, but what's your take on that?
okay. Well, what you're referring to is called syndication. So syndication is just essentially getting your RSS feed together and then you put it out into the world. In order to get your podcast on Apple Podcasts, you have to go through a basic screening process with them. And that is where 60% of podcast listeners, that's where it happens. Several of the apps that are available actually just pull from Apple's feed. And so once you have that Apple feed up, you can be almost good to go, but the reality is then you're leaving out a lot of Android. So your RSS feed should also be submitted to the iHeartMedia, Spotify. Spotify has a somewhat manual process, Stitcher. Those are really the primary. There's a complete list in the MediaCasters new book, The Autocasters, and we are hot linking that. So there's actually a QR code you can scan and go to that page, and then there's like a hot link of all the direct links to submit your RSS feed to. I just went through this process on Friday last week, so that list is really current. Because there are a lot of them out there that kind of like all of a sudden the website doesn't work, and you're like, okay, well obviously this is defunct. But there's about 30 different spots that we recommend that you submit your RSS feed to. And you might only get a couple listeners at some of them, but if that's where someone likes to listen, you want to be there. Like I tend to listen on Google Podcasts. I also love this new app called Podyssey, spelled like Odyssey, but with a P in front of it, because people write reviews about specific episodes they like, and then you can choose to follow people, and it just kind of helps you discover new content. And I'm really looking specifically now to find more independent content. Like I don't want to listen to all the Wondery Run shows. I mean, I like some of them, I do, but I want to give my airtime and my attention to other independent voices. That's what I'm passionate about. So, surely.
I have a quick question. So
Yes.
thank you, first of all, for this wonderful talk. It was super informative. You're doing so many different things. You've written a book and you have your own podcasts, multiple, and then you're doing guest appearances. So how do you balance your time and how do you prioritize your very limited time among all these ventures?
So, okay. So how many classes do you take at a time?
Two.
Two.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for years and years, I only worked for one company, right? And I worked for one company and then I had my passions outside that I would do, race cars and ride horses. Those are my two major ones. I now compartmentalize my time. I do time blocking. The morning hours, I'm very focused on my work in omega-3s and the job that pays the bills, let's be frank. Like that's where I spent 20 years building businesses. I'm now launching Nutrition Without Compromise, which is a podcast show dedicated to nutrient solutions without compromising your ethics or the health of the planet, like those two things. So yes, probably more leaning in the plant-based arena, but it's connected to my work. So I might do some podcasting work that relates to that in the mornings. And in the afternoons, I shift my focus and I go first into Care More, Be Better for a little bit, which is I've got to give this piece some attention because it's my, I mean, of all the podcasts, it's number one. I want it to maintain, but I'm putting more of my focus and energy into the newer projects. And when I find I'm the most creative is generally speaking between the hours of about 2 and 4 o'clock. And so that's when I'm trying to spend my time creating. And that could be some time writing, but sometime also doing things like blogging. And I will say the other thing is I learned when I was in grad school here how much I could accomplish in a day. And it was shocking, but I do tend to sacrifice sleep. And so sometimes up till midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, getting some of the stuff done that might be more tedious. It doesn't necessarily need as much brain power, but just to get through it. And so I can be present for my kids in the evenings. So I'm there with them in the evenings from like 5 to 8 and then go back to work until sometimes midnight or 1. But that's also when you're in brand building phase, when you're in launch phase. And that's kind of what I look at the Mediacasters as. I mean, we're launching a platform to help independent voices rise. And I think we all need more of that. Like if all we're hearing are the Wonderies, the Spotifys, the Simon and Schuster and the Rodale voices, then what happens to everybody else? There's no real democratization of access to get your voice into the world in a way that's professional and can represent you well. And so that's what we're working to do. Yeah. Anyway.
I had one quick
Yeah.
question if we have the time. So in terms of speakers and the different folks that you've connected, how do you look out for, is it a certain theme that you're looking at speakers under that, or maybe have you touched on it before? How do you pick those speakers that you want to interview?
So, I mean, this is a complicated question because I thought for a while, I want my podcast to be focused only on social impact. I'm going to stop telling as many stories on sustainability. And then I get somebody coming to me in the middle of that wants to talk about climate activism. And the story they're working to tell is really unique and I like it. So I'm like, okay, yes, I'll go ahead and tell that story. I really look at it as I focus everything back on the mission. I'm focused on putting more good into the world, and like that's the most general way. So if they're just coming to me and they want to sit there and talk about their entrepreneurial effort for 20 minutes and not really give my audience anything of content, I don't want to have that conversation. So one of the things I've worked to do is host a pre-call where I get to know them over 15 or 20 minutes. And, some of the bigger names will never do that, but like, if I'm able to have like a brief interlude with somebody and understand if they're actually working to tell a story that's meaningful, that will push for change, that puts purpose before profit or purpose before the product, because I don't want to just be sitting here as an advertorial. That's not what the purpose of the show is. And so I stay true to that and then I keep it rolling. Did that answer your question? Yeah. I don't think so. I think you're asking something else too.
No, I was just asking like, what's the theme like that you go on with? So it seems like it's everything. It's not
It seems like it's everything.
It's not like sustainability. It's not like.
Yeah, I mean, I go into deep dives for periods too. Like I went into kind of a tech deep dive with regard to sustainability. So like I interviewed Manik Suri, who's the founder of Helotherma, and he's seeking to solve some of our refrigeration challenges on a global scale by using AI to integrate with fixed refrigerators to make them more efficient so they're using less energy, right? And then I took that as a thread to then dive deeper into the subject of energy and how we're optimizing energy. As I spoke with Energy Ogre, which is a company in Texas that even just through improving efficiencies has been able to save Texans 40% of what they've like reduced their expenses by 40% as it relates to energy, which is incredible, right? So like these companies are using technology to make major things happen that can actually support people on a global scale, not just here, right? They're putting technology at this in the solution space. So I thought that was really interesting. And so I go for that a little bit more deeply. And I feel like sometimes when I do that, if I stay on one subject, I think some of my audience leaves because then I'm like hyper focused on the one thing. And one of the things I've done is to really look at the reviews I'm getting. And some of them are like, oh, well, what I love about this podcast is I get to discover a completely new thing I didn't know anything about and at least get some knowledge around it and understand it a little bit better because I try to keep everything kind of at a consumer level, meaning like I had somebody come on, this is actually Minik Suri again on the Hello Therma, and he started talking about CAGR. And CAGR is CAGR, compound annual growth rate. You guys, we know that, we learned that here. But if somebody didn't go to business school, they don't know what CAGR means. Like, what, are you talking about doing keg stands at a party here? Like, is this frat central now? So when I have a guest that goes a little too deep or off the rails in these arenas, I go, let's talk about what this means. What's CAGR? You know, how does that affect the conversation we're having today? And so I just work to try and keep the audience in mind as I'm building out my content and deciding who I want to interview.
For example, would you also take a speaker from somebody who is working in a tech company, but is in the social impact world and like doing a lot around the community or getting employees to do a lot around the community? Would you consider someone there as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would.
Okay.
And like, the thing is, I don't want to only have conversations with the Paul Hawkins of the world. Because at the end of the day, there's only so many of them. They're hard to get, and sometimes they'll never share your podcast, right? So one of the things that is actually important about having an interview format show is I provide them with assets that they would want to share in social media. So that's like the free marketing. I mean, it's not free because you spent the time, you did the editing, you did all this work, but through them sharing it, now you're going to make a bigger impact. You're going to reach more people. You could potentially even discover other people that you want to interview. I hear voices. Do we have more questions? Hi, Cindy.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, Karina.
Yes.
So Bina's asked, what do you think about the podcasts that are recorded on Zoom?
Oh. Well, I recorded my podcast on Zoom for 8 months. And I will tell you that they really upped their game amidst the COVID pandemic. They realized that there was quite a few, the signature slide, there were quite a few people that were going to play music through Zoom as an application during the pandemic. And so they made available a bunch of like tools in the background that you can turn on. You can turn on professional sound. You can choose how much you want them to adjust your volume based on the volume of other people speaking and things like that. So there's some tools that make Zoom actually a very good recording implement now. I'm presently using StreamYard, which is another application. We pay like, I don't know, $50 a month for that one. It's more expensive, but it's because I'm wanting to live stream and also get separate audio. One of the keys in any of these platforms, if you're recording with Zoom, record it resident on your computer and make sure you've set up your settings to provide you with separate audio tracks. Because otherwise, if you only have one audio track and there's 3 people on the call and you're all talking and someone's dog is barking in the background, or they cough or sneeze or something and they're not the one speaking, you can't edit that out. It's very, very challenging. But if you have each person have their own audio track, then you can edit it quite easily and it just makes for a much nicer end product. So you can use Zoom, you can use something like StreamYard. I had to increase my subscription to get the separate audio tracks, which is why it's 50 a month. Normally it's like 20. But there are many, many other tools, and it's a pretty competitive space. So I would just do your research and find which ones you like. You can often do free trials for a week to a month, depending on the platform. And yeah, just try it out.
And then Cindy asked, what is the name of your new book?
Audiocasters. It is Audiocasters. Here's the picture, Cindy. The Ultimate Guide to Podcasting. And it's not out yet, but because you're here, we're going to give you a free copy of it. So it's being edited presently. It's well, it's already edited. It's being formatted for Kindle. So we'll have the EPUB version of it soon, and we can provide that to you. Yeah, cool. All right. So I put my contact details up here. I have 2 basic emails that I'm sharing with the world, Karina@themediacasters.com for anything related to podcasting in general. But if you guys want to connect with me specifically on the topics of social impact and sustainability, I try to compartmentalize it. That's like getting back to like what you work on and when. So if it's about Care More Be Better, social impact and sustainability, send it to Karina@caremorebebetter.com. You also have the option, if you go to caremorebebetter.com, you can leave me a voicemail. So this is one of the functionalities of my website. You can literally just talk to me and I'll get that and respond. I put my social profiles up here. If you want to discover new independent podcasts, Podtease is there for you. We publish new episodes every Friday. And the Mediacasters is at the Mediacasters everywhere. Care More Be Better was tough to own because Twitter has a 15-character limit. I couldn't spell it out, so it's Care More Be Better without the final E and better. Same thing with Clubhouse, it's Care More Be Better. But you know, that's such as life. The Mediacasters and Podtease are just real simple, they're everywhere. But I just try to be available and not ever present on social media, but I do go out there. And if you guys don't know about this app, the Wisdom app, it just became available on Android in April, and I'm an Android girl, but I have an iPad, so I had to get an iPad to get on Clubhouse before it was available everywhere. It's really cool because it's a one-to-one conversation. So if you're just starting out and you want to have conversations and you're trying your voice on for size, it's less daunting than Clubhouse for that reason. It was designed by Dayo Akinrinade. She's an African English woman who has chosen to create this as almost a rival in a way to Clubhouse. But she had an app that she ran before that, which was like Tinder, but for Black Europeans. And now she's doing this particular show, what is it called? It's just called Wisdom app. So you look for it, it's like got Einstein in profile is what it looks like. It's kind of purple. And she hosts rooms there. It's really big with coaches. So people are going there looking for guidance and they have one-to-one conversations. You can go on stage for as little as a few minutes or stay for 10, and sometimes it's set for an hour. And what's cool about the application is that people are sharing knowledge and they're getting coins or points, and you can redeem the coins or points for things like a Starbucks gift card or an Amazon gift card. So it's actually a way to kind of pay you back for your time spent on social, which is really interesting. The new model, see what happens there. I've actually worked to record, I interviewed Dayo Akinrinade on the Mediacasters, and I've also demonstrated that you can record quality audio on the Wisdom app. You do need some tools to do it. So if you go and you find me on the Wisdom app, then you can listen to some of my past streams there where I detail how to do that. I'm also open to sharing it voice to voice, and I think we included those stories in Audiocasters, the book too. So I use a little bit of tech, not very much, but you can spend a couple $100 and get a Zoom PodTrack P4, which is a microphone interface, and connect it up to whatever devices that you're using to record, whether it be an iPad or a cell phone, your computer. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karina.
Thank you.
We're at
This is really
time.
fun.
Thank you so much for making your time and coming here to present to us. This was awesome. Listening to everything that you do and you have available. And thank you all for coming to this Net Impact event. We are so happy that you could join us, and look
you.
forward to our other Knit Impact events coming up in the following quarters.
Sounds really good. Thank you.
Oh, and please do take some refreshments. We have drinks and
Bye, Cindy.
Great.
Bye, Cindy.
we have drinks and snacks. So.
Very good.
So should I end the meeting?
Yes.